Do humans need to socialize? Human beings are typically understood to be social creatures. After all, if we were solitary by nature, we wouldn't group ourselves together into civilizations, workplaces, friend groups, and families. For the most part, it would seem that humans enjoy being around each other and the act of being social. But do we really need each other? And what about introverts, who prefer to spend large amounts of free time by themselves instead of engaging in social activities? In other words, do human beings really need to socialize? That's one topic that Bestie is setting out to investigate today. Before we continue, we'd like to suggest that you subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. That way you can stay up to date on all our daily videos. Humans are generally understood to be social creatures. However, it can also be said that some of us are certainly a lot more voluntarily social than others. This is the major difference between the two groups of people known as introverts and extroverts. On one hand, you have introverts, who prefer to spend free time by themselves and sometimes feel emotionally drained when interacting with others. On the other, you have extroverts, who enjoy being around other people and thrive in social situations, but may not be as content during moments of solitude. But what about people who find themselves separated from other people for extended periods of time? Even longer than your average introvert spends by themselves? Would they be able to function normally without the human contact? Or would constant solitude and loneliness have a major effect on that person's long-term physical and mental health? In Gregory Smith Simon's book Cause and How It Doesn't Always Equal Effect, one of the topics Smith-Simon discusses is whether or not a person would be able to function. As an example, Smith-Simon writes about the story of Robinson Crusoe, written by Daniel Defoe in 1919. The original novel tells the story of a man who becomes stranded on a desert island after a shipwreck, and as a result is forced to become entirely self-sufficient as a means of survival. While many came to romanticize this idea of perfect solitude, Smith-Simon points out something interesting. The character of Robinson Crusoe is believed to be inspired by a real-life figure by the name of Henry Pitman. Like Crusoe in the novel, Pitman became stranded on an island, but not by himself. 13 other survivors were also shipwrecked along with him. Had Pitman truly been alone, like the character he would come to inspire, things may not have gone so well for him. In his article for Psychology Today, therapist Jonathan Foyles also shares his musings on whether or not a person would be able to survive with their sanity intact if kept in complete isolation. In the article, Foyles writes about working with several patients who were subjected to solitary confinement, a punishment employed by prisons and similar establishments that cuts a person off from all other human contacts for extended periods of time. According to Foyles, the effects of long-term solitary confinement can lead to mental health-related symptoms, such as hallucinations, mood swings, and loss of impulse control, as well as other forms of long-term psychological scarring. Foyles also points out that the effects of solitary confinement aren't only experienced by prisoners. The negative effects of long-term isolation can also be felt by hospital patients, whose conditions render them unable to leave their beds for long periods of time as well. Another perpetrator responsible for negative amounts of isolation, according to Foyles, are the rapid technological advances and conveniences we have created for ourselves as a species. While the therapist does point out that many of our technological devices can be beneficial and enjoyable, they may also contribute to decreased amounts of face-to-face interactions with other humans. Foyles points out how modern conveniences like television, air conditioning, and the internet have made it more enticing for us to stay at home, stay indoors, and keep to ourselves, even at the expense of our mental health through lack of socialization. In addition, Foyles' article points out that the rise of the internet and lack of personal, face-to-face levels of interaction has also led to the spread of misinformation and propagation of conspiracy theories, which he describes as a poor man's way of building community, separating the world into those with secret knowledge and the masses without. According to Foyles, human beings need to be able to interact in order to form a communal understanding of the world around them, something that cannot be properly cultivated through increased periods of isolation. He also points out, however, that the human experience is inherently subjective. and a healthy amount of required social interaction is likely to vary from person to person. Of course, this brings up an entirely new question as well. If human beings do require social interaction in order to properly function, then why is the world separated into introverts and extroverts? After all, if people work better together than when they're apart, then it would seem counterproductive to have some people with an innate desire to spend time alone. In his own article, psychology professor Glenn Gare asks this very question, hoping to determine where introversion fits into the larger scope of human evolution. According to his findings, Gare noticed something interesting. Basic personality traits such as extroversion and emotional stability appear to be normally and somewhat evenly distributed across human populations. In other words, he points out that most people in any given populated area will score somewhere in the middle of the introvert-extrovert scale, while a comparatively smaller subset of individuals will end up falling on one end of the spectrum or the other. Based on what we've learned so far about human interaction, this seems strange. If socialization is so important for us, wouldn't it make more sense if everyone was an extrovert? Gare suggests that, as it turns out, the reason for this might be because introversion and extroversion are equally viable from an evolutionary perspective, each of the two personality types bringing their own strengths and weaknesses to the table. While extroverts are more outgoing and sociable, they are also more statistically prone to accidents than introverts, who are comparatively less prone to these things. As a result, Gare argues that human civilization benefits best from a healthy and relatively even mix of differing personality types, in a process that he refers to as balancing selection. In other words, both introverts and extroverts bring their own unique skills and traits to the evolutionary table, and both serve to cover each other's weaker points in social groups. So what do you think about this topic? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? How much time do you normally spend by yourself, and how much time do you usually devote to friends and loved ones? We'd love to hear your personal stories, experiences, and opinions in the comments below. So please keep the conversation going and share this video with all your friends. Enjoyed this video? Hit the like button and share with your friends. Also, subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.